My name is Jake, a student at Columbia University. I will never forget the day an interview turned into a nightmare. It all started innocently, with an email that seemed to come from a reputable company. The message offered a well-paid internship opportunity, something that immediately caught my attention. Like many students, I needed an internship to beef up my resume and gain some practical experience. The email appeared legitimate, complete with the company's logo and a detailed description of the position. After a few email exchanges, they scheduled the interview at a cafe in the city. The location was convenient, right downtown where several other cafes and shops are located. On the morning of the interview, I was eager but confident. I put on my best outfit and left early to ensure I would arrive on time. Arriving at the place, I started looking for the cafe, but strangely, I couldn't find the name I was given. I walked around the block a few times, checked the address again, but something was off. There was no cafe by that name. I began to feel uneasy, a sense of something not being right. That's when my phone rang. The voice on the other end was from the supposed interviewer, saying he was waiting in a nearby alley and that it would be easier for us to meet there. The request seemed odd, but believing it to be a misunderstanding or a last-minute change, I decided to go to the alley. As I walked towards the indicated place, my apprehension grew. Turning the corner, I saw a tall hooded man waiting in the shadows. My heart raced. Reluctantly, I continued walking towards the man. Each step felt heavier than the last, and my instinct screamed for me to walk away, but my mind tried to rationalize the situation. Perhaps it was just a miscommunication. As I drew closer, the hooded figure became clearer. He was a tall man with a rigid posture and a menacing presence. His eyes gleamed sinisterly from under the shadow of the hood. He looked straight at me, and in that moment, I realized something was terribly wrong. He spoke in a cold, direct manner, insisting that I follow him to a nearby abandoned building. My heart raced, and a sense of panic began to overwhelm me. I tried to argue, suggesting that we go to a public place instead, but he dismissed all my suggestions. The man began walking towards the abandoned building, and I looked around, searching for any sign of help. But the streets were eerily deserted that morning. With no clear options, I felt a wave of fear paralyze my body. I decided to follow him, keeping a safe distance and staying alert to any suspicious movements. As we approached the building, I saw other shadowy figures inside. There were 3 men, all with grim faces and threatening glances. This place was far from an office or anything remotely related to a job interview. They seemed to be waiting for me, which heightened my dread even more. I was in a dead end, both literally and figuratively. The doors were all locked, and the windows were too small for me to escape through. The only exit was the entrance we had come in through. Feeling adrenaline surge through me, I realized that my only chance was to run from there as fast as possible. The situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. I looked at the threatening faces of the men around me and knew I had to act quickly. Without a second thought, I turned around and started running with all my strength towards the alley exit. The sound of rapid footsteps behind me confirmed they were chasing me. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I dashed past piles of trash and old boxes, trying to use any obstacle to slow my pursuers. As I turned the corner, I spotted a busy street and felt a glimmer of hope. I ran even faster, screaming for help as I tried to reach the safety of the crowd. Gradually, people began to notice my desperation. A group of pedestrians turned to see what was happening, and a man finally came towards me. He pulled me close and asked what was going on. Out of breath, I quickly explained that I was being followed by dangerous men. The man immediately took me into a nearby store and called the police. I waited there, trembling, trying to calm my breathing and my racing heart. When the officers arrived, I told them everything that had happened. They searched for the men but were unable to find them. The criminals had vanished. Although I was physically safe, the emotional impact of that encounter would stay with me for a long time. The police started an investigation, but they never discovered who those men were or what they wanted from me. Returning to campus was a relief, but the feeling of being watched never completely disappeared. After that experience, I became much more cautious about invitations and job offers. That morning changed my life forever, teaching me the importance of trusting my instincts and always being alert to signs of danger.
My name is Sarah, and I've always loved Halloween parties. In my sophomore year at university, I heard about an amazing party that was to be held in an old industrial building. The decoration was promised to be frightening, with mazes and settings to scare even the bravest. I invited some friends and we all went together, ready for a night of fun. Little did I know that the night would turn into a real nightmare. The building was huge and perfectly decorated for the occasion. There were flashing lights, loud music, and elaborate costumes everywhere. The atmosphere was electric, with laughter and screams of fright echoing through the corridors. As the night progressed, we split up to explore the different settings. I was particularly excited about the maze, which was said to be the highlight of the party. I entered the maze alone, confident that I would meet my friends on the other side. The walls were made of dark fabric, and the dim lighting created unsettling shadows. With each step, the environment became darker and the sounds more distant. Suddenly, without realizing it, I passed through a different door and found myself in an unknown corridor. The decor became less elaborate and more frightening as I advanced. The corridor I entered was narrow and poorly lit, with an oppressive atmosphere. I continued walking, hoping to find the exit or someone who could help me get back to the party. However, the more I walked, the more lost I felt. The doors along the corridor were locked, and I began to feel a growing sense of claustrophobia. I looked around, trying to keep calm, but everything seemed threatening. I called for help, but the loud music muffled my cries. I began to explore the warehouse, looking for an exit or any clue on how to get back to the maze. It was like being in a nightmare. Shadows danced on the walls, and the silence between the echoes of the party made everything more sinister. The feeling of being watched never left me. I felt a chill down my spine and realized that I needed to find a way out quickly before something worse happened. The corridor I found myself in resembled a real maze, with narrow passages and various doors leading to unknown places. Fear began to set in deeper when I realized I was truly lost. I tried to remain calm and rationalize the situation, thinking that I would soon find someone who could help me. However, the silence of the warehouse was in stark contrast to the noisy party I had just left. Continuing my search for an exit, I noticed that the warehouse was filled with stacked boxes and old equipment, covered in dust. The atmosphere was oppressive, and the musty smell made breathing more difficult. With each step I took, my anxiety grew. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps, light and cautious, echoing through the corridor. My heart raced. I stopped for a moment, holding my breath to listen better. Someone was there with me. As I walked through the dark corridors, I saw a figure moving in the distance. At first, I thought it was another lost guest, but as the figure approached, I realized something was terribly wrong. It was a tall man with a grim and threatening expression. He was holding a knife that glinted in the dim light. My eyes widened in fear, and I instinctively stepped back, trying not to make a noise. The man began to walk in my direction, and I knew I needed to find an exit quickly. I frantically looked for a door or a window, anything that could get me out of there. Every door I tried was locked, and the feeling of desperation increased with each failed attempt. I screamed for help, but the loud music from the party muffled my cries. The man was getting closer and closer, and I knew that my time was running out. Desperate, I ran down the corridor toward the window, my heart pounding wildly. I glanced back and saw the sinister man approaching with quick, determined steps. Panic gave me an extra burst of energy, and I continued running with all my might. When I finally reached the window, my hope soared, but the window was locked. In a burst of adrenaline, I pushed hard and, fortunately, the window opened just enough for me to squeeze through. Struggling, I wriggled through the narrow opening, feeling the cool night air wrap around me. As soon as I got out, I fell to the ground but quickly got up. ignoring the pain from the minor scrapes. The sense of imminent danger was still present, and I knew I needed to get as far away from that place as possible. I ran through the dark streets, not looking back until I reached a busy street. Stopping for a moment to catch my breath, I realized how much I was shaking. The people around me seemed oblivious to what I had just been through. I found an open convenience store and rushed inside. The clerk looked at me with concern, and I quickly explained that I was being chased by an armed man. He immediately called the police and offered me a place to hide until they arrived. The wait for the police felt endless, but they finally arrived. I told them everything that had happened, from the Halloween party to the terrifying encounter in the warehouse. They sent some officers to investigate the site, but when they returned, they found no sign of the man. He had disappeared without a trace. The relief of being safe was quickly replaced by the lingering fear that he might still be out there, lurking. In the days that followed, the memory of that night haunted me. Returning to campus was a relief, but the experience left a mark. The police continued their investigation, but without concrete leads, the case eventually went cold. I tried to resume my normal routine, but the feeling of being watched never completely disappeared. Every time I hear footsteps behind me or see a suspicious shadow, I'm transported back to that night of terror. I've never been to a Halloween party with the same carelessness again. The experience taught me to be much more cautious about the places and people around me. I share this story as a warning for everyone to stay alert and follow their instincts when something feels off. What should have been a night of fun nearly became a nightmare from which I might not have escaped.
My name is John, and my first year at Stanford University started in a typical manner, filled with all the excitement and nervousness that college life brings. I was assigned to share a room with a fellow named David. At first, he seemed just a bit reserved, but polite. He was the type of person who kept to himself, which didn't bother me, as I also appreciated my personal space. Little did I know that those initial impressions would drastically change in the months to follow. In the early days, I noticed some peculiarities about David. He had a habit of staying up late, long after I had gone to bed. I would often hear whispers and strange murmurings coming from his side of the room, as if he was talking to himself or repeating words in an unknown language. When I asked him about it, he always gave vague answers, saying it was just a way to relax or study. This made me uncomfortable, but I tried not to make too much of it. As the months passed, David's strange behaviors became more frequent and disturbing. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw David standing in the middle of the room, staring fixedly at a wall. He was motionless, as if in a trance. When I called out to him, he slowly turned his head toward me, with a blank and disturbing look. He went back to bed without saying a word, as if nothing had happened. That scene left me deeply unsettled. Moreover, David had a growing collection of bizarre objects. Old dolls, pictures of people I had never seen, and newspaper clippings about unsolved crimes. He kept everything organized in boxes under the bed and in the closet. When I inquired about his collection, he became defensive and said they were just hobbies. I began to avoid spending time in the room and looked for any excuse to stay out of the house. The situation came to a head one day. While David was in class, I found a diary hidden under his mattress. My curiosity overcame my hesitation, and I began to flip through the diary. What I found left me horrified. The pages were filled with details about macabre rituals and horrendous plans, written with chilling precision. There were disturbing drawings and descriptions of violent dreams. Each line seemed more sinister than the last, and I realized I was dealing with something far more serious than mere eccentricity. After discovering the diary, my perception of David completely changed. Every night by his side became a restless vigil. From that day on, I started sleeping with one eye open, fearing what he might do. His behaviors became even more disturbing. He often spent entire nights awake, murmuring words and languages I couldn't identify. Sometimes he laughed to himself, a foreboding sound that echoed through the dark room. Each night, my nerves wore thinner. One day, I suddenly woke up to the sound of something moving around the room. In the dim light, I saw David kneeling on the floor, surrounded by lit candles, and murmuring in a low voice. He was drawing strange symbols on the ground with red ink. I was paralyzed with fear, watching as he continued his bizarre ritual. When he finally finished and extinguished the candles, he lay down and fell asleep as if nothing had happened. I began to feel a dark presence in the room, something that went beyond David's eccentric behaviors. Sometimes, it felt as if I was being watched, even when he was not there. Objects in the room seemed to move on their own, and a constant sense of dread hung in the air. I was convinced that David was involved in something sinister, something I couldn't fully comprehend. My grades started to drop, and my mental state deteriorated rapidly. Each passing day, I became more paranoid and anxious. My friends noticed the change in my behavior and asked me what was happening. I wanted to tell someone about David, but I was afraid no one would believe me. After all, how could I explain that my roommate was performing macabre rituals and speaking in strange tongues without sounding insane? One day, I decided I could no longer bear the situation. I gathered my courage and went to speak with the campus residential advisor. I reported everything I had witnessed, including the macabre diary and the nocturnal rituals. The advisor listened attentively and promised to investigate the situation. He advised me to stay elsewhere temporarily while the campus administration resolved the issue. Finally, I felt a relief, knowing I was no longer alone. That night, I slept on a friend's couch, but the sense of danger was still present. I tried to rest, but images from the past nights continued to haunt my dreams. I hoped that the campus administration would act quickly to remove David from the dormitory. The idea of returning to that room and facing another night beside him was unbearable. After reporting my concerns to the residential advisor, the campus administration acted swiftly. They called David in for a talk and conducted an inspection in the room while he was absent. When they returned, the serious expression on the advisor's face confirmed my suspicions. They found the diary and the strange objects I had mentioned. It was decided that David would be removed from the dormitory and subjected to a psychological evaluation. I was relieved, but also deeply shaken. The sense of immediate danger had lessened, but the experience left a lasting mark on me. When I returned to the room to gather my belongings, I saw that the symbols on the floor had been cleaned, and David's objects were packed in boxes. The room felt lighter, but the memory of what had happened there was still very present. A few weeks later, I was called in for a meeting with the campus administration. They informed me that David had been transferred to a mental health institution. During the evaluation, it was discovered that he had a history of severe psychiatric problems, including episodes of hallucinations and violent behavior. The diary I had found was analyzed by professionals, who concluded that the writings reflected disturbing delusions, potentially dangerous. Knowing this was a relief and a shock at the same time. Part of me felt sorry for David, who clearly needed help. However, the other part was terrified by how close I had been to real danger. I began to have trouble sleeping, always remembering the unsettling looks and sleepless nights, questioning how I had been so close to such a great danger. Over time, I tried to resume my normal life at the university. However, the experience left an emotional scar. I had to deal with constant anxiety and fear that something similar might happen again. My friends and family supported me, and I sought professional help to deal with the traumas left by this experience. Today, I share my story not to scare, but to warn about the importance of paying attention to signs of disturbing behavior. If something seems wrong, it's crucial to seek help and not ignore your instincts. My experience with David taught me to be more vigilant and to value the importance of mental health. I hope my story serves as a reminder that danger can be closer than we think, and that we must always be alert and cautious.